Her expectation is that when ministers make mistakes, they correct the record as quickly as possible, which she says Ms Curran did. But Nationals leader Simon Bridges says Clare Curran is skating on thin ice.
The reality of it was a meeting, you'd have to say pretty formal, about RNZ and its future. So I think Clare Curran is in real trouble here. I think it's hard for the opposition. I think it's hard for New Zealanders, frankly, to believe a word she says.
Simon Bridges stopped short of saying Ms Curran should resign, saying there were a lot more questions that needed to be asked about the whole situation. But he says this incident and several others make it clear that the wheels are falling off the Labour government.
We're effectively seeing cover-ups, whether it's on alleged sexual assaults that weren't disclosed to the Prime Minister, that didn't go to the police, whether it's on coercion of a Member of Parliament and bullying, frankly, around what's happening there, or whether it's in relation to the cover-up with what has happened with Carol Hirschfeld and Clare Curran.
RNZ's chairperson Richard Griffin says he'll be making a statement to the Select Committee, as the last one provided was based on false information from Carol Hirschfeld. The chair of the committee, Jonathan Young, says that would be appropriate, but he needs to discuss the matter with the rest of the committee before deciding how to proceed. Atu i te whare pārimata mō te hōtaka o te ata nei, ko Chris Bramwell.
That's 14 minutes past 7. We did ask to interview the Broadcasting Minister Clare Curran this morning, but she declined the offer. Also, Carol Hirschfeld told Morning Report that she would not be commenting. Paul Thompson, the Chief Executive of RNZ, did speak to RNZ News yesterday, but he declined a further interview. And the RNZ's board chair, Richard Griffin, said he wouldn't be commenting until he'd corrected the information given to the Select Committee. Our political editor, Jane Patterson, is following this story. She's with us now. Jane, good morning. Thank you for being with us. Now, for Clare Curran, politically, how precarious is her position?
This is very untidy for Clare Curran. Now, she won't lose her job for now, but she really has pushed this to the line. And remember, too, that she's the Minister for Open Government as well as her broadcasting portfolio. And there have been a number of missteps. And the first one was in December when she failed to disclose the meeting with Carol Hirschfeld, despite it being in her diary, in response to a question from Melissa Lee. It was in her diary as CH at Astoria for an 8:15 morning meeting. Now, later on in February, Melissa Lee followed up about that meeting, and Clare Curran was very vague in her responses. She did not mention it was a scheduled meeting. She did not describe it as coincidental, however, and that is really the key in terms of whether she had misled Parliament, which she should not do, but she was certainly not forthcoming about the planned nature of that meeting, describing it as informal and not official. And then she contacted RNZ twice, and that was around the Select Committee appearances once Paul Thompson and Richard Griffin had appeared, and then again when the Select Committee was considering the draft report on the 22nd of March. But she made no public statements correcting, which were then obviously incorrect statements made inadvertently to the Select Committee by the Chief Executive and the Chair.
So it has come from National that they're saying this is a cover-up. Is it fair to say that that's what it looks like, Jane?
Well, they are going back to the non-disclosure primarily in that first written question back in December because she did not declare it. Now, the problem for Clare Curran and for Radio New Zealand as well is that any suggestion that this was a clandestine meeting, although we have to add it was held in a very public cafe in Wellington, is very troublesome for the broadcaster and for the minister. Now, it wasn't clandestine, it was held in full view, but the problem is the way that it was handled and queries handled by both Clare Curran and Carol Hirschfeld. Any suggestion that there was any backdoor contact between a senior news executive from RNZ and a minister, especially in this very delicate time where there is this $38 million up for grabs for public broadcasting, runs a real risk for RNZ and for the minister. And I imagine that Simon Bridges and National will be pursuing this further. Now, also Fairfax is reporting that the meeting was arranged by text. We have requested those communications, so that may throw further light on the context or the conversation between Clare Curran and Carol Hirschfeld as they arranged this meeting.
That is our political editor, Jane Patterson. Jane, thank you very much for That is our political editor speaking, of course, about the situation with Clare Curran and indeed with the Broadcasting Minister, Clare Curran. Now, we did mention that we did ask to speak to the Broadcasting Minister. She was unavailable this morning, as were Carol Hirschfeld, Paul Thompson and indeed the Chair of RNZ's board, Richard Griffin. It is now 18 minutes past 7.
Yeah, a bit of feedback on this issue already this morning. This one in from a listener. Bob has got in touch. He says, what's the fuss about this meeting? Why is it a sackable offence? This has never been satisfactorily explained. Well, hopefully we can do that for you this morning, Bob. I think we can go to Melissa Lee now, who is the National Party spokesperson for broadcasting and has been making the running on this story with her questions in Parliament. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Gail.
Now, what is your reaction to what happened yesterday, firstly?
Well, it first of all came a little bit as a surprise because I wasn't in Wellington when it actually occurred. I did get a heads up a few minutes before the story broke by the chair of RNZ, and he did actually tell me of the impending resignation of Carol Hirschfeld, and that came a bit of a surprise. She's a well-respected journalist, and this was never about.
Okay, what did he tell you about why she was resigning?
The conversation that I had with the chair is between he and I think you need to ask the chair that, what he told me. But he did actually tell me that he was giving me a heads up that Carol Hirschfeld was resigning.
All right, let's cut to the chase of it. Did the right person resign?
That is up to the Prime Minister and Clare Curran and Carol Hirschfeld to maybe perhaps answer. But my questioning in the House was about a meeting that happened, and the Minister was very cagey about answering it. Initially, she did not answer. She failed to disclose the meeting, even though now, as it transpires in the news yesterday, that it was a diary note.
Okay, this is the problem that we're all running into, though. I understand it, but this is my industry, right? So I get it, and I get politics. But if I'm sitting listening at home around New Zealand, as many hundreds of thousands are, and I tell them, this person resigned because they had a meeting, they don't understand what the problem is. Can you spell out for listeners this morning what the problem is here?
The problem is that Carol Hirschfeld was the head of news, head of content at RNZ. RNZ is a state broadcaster who actually gets funding from the government. The Labour Party manifesto before the election promised $38 million to boost the public broadcasting funds coffers, and the minister has actually said that Radio New Zealand would get probably the majority of funding to create RNZ Plus, which includes a television component. And so when there is actually a lot of money at stake, I think people will be wanting to know if the minister is engaging with head of content when she should really be discussing this with the board. And this meeting actually happened 2 days.
Here we go. Okay, but let's stick with that because it's complex for people. Okay, but you've hit it on the head there. The chain of command is the problem here too, isn't it? Right?
That's what I would have thought.
The minister is supposed to communicate with the board chair, or the chief executive, presumably, not the head of content. That's the problem here, right?
And as it transpires, that the board chair and the chief executive did not even know that the meeting was planned.
And let's go to the ministerial responsibility here. When you become a minister, you get what's called a briefing for incoming ministers. I've gone back and had a look at it today. It's only 16 pages long. It will take you about 5 minutes to read it. In this, it says that, and it gives the photos, in case you're in any confusion, of Richard Griffin and Paul Thompson, the chairman of the board and the chief executive of Radio New Zealand. And it sets out for you, as a minister, who the chain of command is. Now, wouldn't you expect a minister of the Crown, who has conceded that it was her who initiated this meeting, to actually know that? Who's the chain of command and who you're supposed to deal with?
You would guess that she would know that.
And what did she do when she diaried the note in the diary? How did she describe the meeting?
Well, I didn't diary it, but according to the media, she diaried it as CH.
Yeah, why?
Astoria.
Why?
That you're going to have to ask the minister.
What do you think?
You're going to have to ask the minister. I don't have a view on that.
If you were listing a meeting and you're writing it on your desk with a bunch of people you're going to catch up with and you didn't want people to know who it was, what would you do?
I may not write it on the diary.
So, do you think the minister knew that she wasn't supposed to be meeting with the head of content?
Well, that is up to you, the great journalist of Radio New Zealand, to find out. And a lot of journalists have actually sort of tried to talk about this issue and the details of why it is actually not Carol Hirschfeld but CH Astoria. Look,
we've tried to talk to the Minister for Open Government this morning, and she won't come on the program.
Oh well. Well, she is the Minister for Open Government, isn't she? Well, I did actually try to ask her questions about her meeting. Initially, she said there was no meeting. Then she tried to say that it was a casual meeting, that it was not an official meeting. Now it transpires that she's actually diaried the meeting. This minister is in trouble, and she has a lot of questions to answer. What did they talk about for an hour?
Well,
if it was just a casual gathering, I mean, would you talk to someone for 1 hour, and what did they talk about? I'm sure RNZ Plus came into, the conversation.
Well, let's go to motivation then, because that's obviously the driving factor here. Why would the minister bypass the chair and the chief executive to speak to the head of content? Why would they do that?
Why would you, as a journalist, bypass a certain source and go to another source? I think you want information, maybe. I'm not so sure. I cannot tell you what is in the minister's head. Only she knows that. Yeah. Only she can answer you why she had a meeting and diaried it the way she did. And what does she discuss? These are the questions that you're going to have to ask the minister, and the minister will have to answer. Because I think, when a minister who is responsible for funding of public broadcasting to the tune of $38 million, and she has already promised that quite a large sum of it will go to RNZ, and she's having a private meeting with the head of content, then you've got a problem, I would have thought. I don't have a problem with Radio New Zealand being funded. I think Radio New Zealand does a fantastic job. But there is a process. There is a protocol in which the minister is supposed to engage with the entity, and she did not do that in the proper manner.
Should she resign?
That is up to her and her Prime Minister. But I think the Prime Minister has a major headache. She can't seem to control her ministers.
Would you prefer her to stay in the job?
Would I prefer her to stay in the job? Wow. A difficult one, that.
Thanks for your time. Melissa Lee there, who is the National Party's spokesperson for broadcasting and communications. It's 7:25. The building at Middlemore Hospital.